What if the story of globalization, the one we're told is about progress, isn't progress at all? What if it's a carefully repeating pattern of rise and ruin? What if the very system that connects every port, every screen, every single dollar was actually designed from its birth to end in collapse? It sounds dramatic, but history doesn't just vanish. It hides in plain sight, waiting for us to see the pattern. Think about it. Every great empire that has connected the world, first the Dutch, then the British, and now the Americans, has followed the same invisible script. It starts with trade. Trade then becomes dependence. Dependence inevitably becomes debt. And debt becomes collapse. This isn't a new story. It's an ancient one playing out right before our eyes. To understand where we're going, we have to rewind to the very beginning. Let's go back 4 centuries, to a small, marshy patch of land surrounded by water that managed to rewire the entire planet. I'm talking about the Dutch Republic. Armed with ships and ledgers instead of kings and crusades, the Dutch discovered something far more powerful than a traditional empire. They discovered credit. In the year 1602, the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC, was born. This wasn't just another trading company, it was a revolution. For the first time, it raised money from ordinary investors by issuing the world's first public shares. It then used that massive pool of capital to build a fleet that would dominate the seas for a century. In this new world, paper replaced coin. Risk itself became a commodity to be bought and sold. Within a single lifetime, Amsterdam transformed into the world's undisputed financial heart. Merchants in coffee houses speculated on the future price of nutmeg and cloves with the same casual intensity that modern traders flip crypto and futures. It was a financial miracle, a golden age that lasted for 100 years. But with every miracle comes a curse. The very system that created so much wealth contained the seeds of its own destruction. Endless wars with rival powers drained the nation's coffers. To keep the machine running, the VOC had to borrow and then borrow some more just to pay the interest on its debts. Investors, now accustomed to huge returns, demanded impossible profits. Speculation turned into a national addiction, and debt became destiny. By the 1700s, the world's first global corporation, the mighty VOC, collapsed under the weight of its own paper promises. But from those ashes, a new power was watching, taking notes, and preparing to take the stage. Britain. The British learned from the Dutch model and built a bigger, better, and more ruthless machine. Their empire was founded on 3 pillars: the unstoppable Royal Navy, the unshakable pound sterling, and the powerful myth of free trade. Factories roared to life in Manchester and Liverpool. Colonies across the globe bled raw materials, and every trade route, every ship, every ounce of profit pointed back to London. For 100 glorious years, the saying was true. The sun never set on the British Empire. Why? Because the debt never slept. The system was fueled by credit, just like the Dutch one before it. But no empire, no matter how powerful, can escape the laws of financial gravity. Industrial might eventually turned into military overstretch. The cost of policing a global empire became staggering. The pound, once as good as gold, began to lose its luster, and one by one the colonies revolted, demanding their independence. Britain fell the same way the Dutch had fallen, slowly, almost invisibly at first, and then all at once. It wasn't a military defeat, it was a financial one. And who was waiting in the wings? The apprentice who was about to become the master, America. World War II was the catalyst. It leveled America's rivals, leaving the United States holding half of the entire planet's wealth and, more importantly, all of its trust. In 1944, at a conference in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, the leaders of the world gathered to design a new global financial system. The agreement they reached would shape the next 75 years. The US dollar would be the world's reserve currency, officially pegged to and redeemable for gold. The world agreed. The dollar would be as good as gold. In practice, this meant that every nation's financial reserves, their national savings, would effectively live inside American banks. Global expansion had a new flag, and it was the Stars and Stripes. This was the first stage of our modern cycle, expansion. American factories, untouched by the war, roared to life, filling orders for a broken world. Europe rebuilt with American money and American goods. Asia began its long journey of industrialization, and America sold them both the dream and the debt required to chase it. The system felt infinite. The 1950s and 60s were an age of unprecedented productivity, boundless optimism, sprawling suburbs, the glow of television, and the dawn of the space age. The entire world's economic heartbeat pulsed in US dollars. This era of expansion naturally led to the next phase, dominance. By the 1960s, the US produced nearly half of everything in the world. Its economic power, its cultural influence through Hollywood and rock and roll, and its military might all fused into one undeniable force. But dominance always demands more. More resources, more control, more spending. The Vietnam War became a financial black hole, burning through money at an astonishing rate. At the same time, massive social spending programs, known as the Great Society, swelled the federal budget at home. America was spending far more than it was taking in, and its gold reserves couldn't keep up with the number of dollars circulating around the world. Foreign countries, particularly France, started getting nervous and began demanding gold in exchange for their dollars, as was their right under the Bretton Woods Agreement. A crisis was brewing. Then, on a Sunday night in August 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on television and made a shocking announcement. He was unilaterally severing the link between the US dollar and gold. The gold window was closed. From that moment on, the dollar was no longer backed by a physical asset. It was backed by only one thing: faith. Faith in the US government. And faith, unlike gold, can be printed in unlimited quantities. This single act ushered in the third stage of the cycle: dependence. To ensure the world would still need dollars, the U.S. struck a deal with the oil-exporting nations of the Middle East. They agreed to price their crude oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. This was the birth of the petrodollar system. Suddenly, any nation on Earth that needed to buy energy, which is every nation, first had to acquire U.S. dollars. Demand for the dollar was now permanently locked in. This gave America an extraordinary power. It could print money to pay for its imports, effectively exporting its inflation to the rest of the world while importing real goods, cars, electronics, clothes. As a result, American factories began to close. It was cheaper to make things overseas. Production was replaced by finance. The nation's economy shifted from making things to moving money. And the richer the system looked on the surface, with stock markets soaring and credit easily available, the weaker its foundations became. Sound familiar? The Dutch called it trade. The British called it empire. Americans called it globalization. Different words, different centuries, but the same core addiction, the illusion of endless growth, built on a mountain of borrowed time. Did you know that every great empire in history has followed the same 7-stage life cycle? From the Romans to the British and now perhaps the global system we live in today. It's a pattern as old as civilization itself, a rhythm of rise and fall that seems almost unbreakable. Let's break down this cycle and see where we stand. It all starts with stage 1, expansion. This is the Big Bang moment. A spark of innovation creates a wave of opportunity. New technologies, new markets, and new trade routes emerge. Think of the Dutch East India Company mastering the seas, or Britain's Industrial Revolution churning out goods the world had never seen. Wealth explodes, and a sense of boundless optimism takes hold. It feels like unstoppable progress, but it's really just the ignition sequence for an empire. Next, we enter stage 2, dominance. The new power becomes the center of the world's gravity. Its currency becomes the standard, its trade routes become the global highways, and its culture starts to seep into every corner of the globe. All roads led to Rome, and for the last 80 years, all capital has flowed through the US dollar. At this stage, dependence feels comfortable, almost like a convenience. Why resist when the system works so well for everyone involved? This is the golden age, the peak of an empire's power and influence, where its supremacy feels natural and permanent. But then something shifts. We enter stage 3, financialization. This is a subtle but critical turning point. The empire stops making as much and starts, making money from money. Production and manufacturing begin to decline, while speculation and complex financial instruments soar. In the United States, this era kicked off in the 1980s. We saw the rise of derivatives, leveraged buyouts, and a culture of debt-driven growth. It creates the illusion of wealth without the hard work of creating actual value. The financial sector becomes more profitable than building things, and the real economy starts to hollow out from the inside. This leads directly to stage 4, overreach. The empire, sensing its foundational strength is waning, doubles down on maintaining its top spot. It starts fighting to freeze its supremacy through any means necessary: costly wars, complex alliances, and economic sanctions. Every crisis becomes a justification for more spending, more debt, and more control. Think of the 2008 financial crisis. The global system seized up, and the response was not to fix the underlying problems, but to print trillions of dollars to keep the illusion of stability alive. At this point, overreach isn't about ambition anymore. It's about survival. The empire is spending money it doesn't have to project power it's beginning to lose. And that spending has a cost, which brings us to stage 5, the debt spiral. When you can no longer create real value, you start manipulating the numbers. This is the stage of desperate measures. Central banks drop interest rates to 0. They launch quantitative easing, which is just a fancy term for creating money out of thin air. Every problem requires a bigger, more expensive fix. It's a tale as old as time. Ancient Rome diluted its silver coins with cheaper metals to pay its soldiers. Britain debased its currency to fund its wars. America expands credit and prints dollars. Initially, the resulting inflation is a hidden tax, quietly eating away at savings. But eventually, it bursts into the open. The cost of living skyrockets, trust in the system plummets, and it's the middle class that ends up footing the bill for the empire's last grand feast. Once the debt becomes unsustainable and trust begins to erode, we hit stage 6, fragmentation. The rest of the world starts looking for the exit doors. They begin to question why they should remain dependent on a declining power. We're seeing this happen right now. China is building its own global infrastructure with the Belt and Road Initiative. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are creating their own development bank as an alternative to the World Bank and IMF. Major oil deals are now being signed in Chinese yuan, not just US dollars. For the first time in nearly a century, the dollar is no longer the automatic, default choice for global trade. Add in shocks like the pandemic, which shattered global supply chains, and the rise of AI, which threatens the cheap labor model that globalization was built on, and you see the great web of global interdependence fraying thread by thread. This brings us to the final, inevitable conclusion. Stage 7, collapse. Collapse doesn't happen with a loud bang. It starts silently, with a loss of confidence. Currencies begin to wobble. Long-standing alliances splinter. The social contract that holds a nation together starts to break down under economic pressure. The fall feels agonizingly slow for years, and then it happens all at once. For the Dutch Empire, it was a sudden bankruptcy. For the British, it was the crushing weight of 2 world wars. And for the American-led global order, the end might not be a dramatic invasion or a revolution. It could be much quieter. A rival digital currency gaining dominance, A sovereign debt default that triggers a chain reaction, or simply the collective global realization that the US dollar is no longer the safest bet. But here's the most unsettling part of our current situation. In the past, when one empire fell, another was always waiting in the wings to take its place. The British took over from the Dutch, America took over from the British, but this time is different. What seems to be collapsing isn't just one nation's dominance, but the entire 400-year-old experiment of a single, interconnected global economy. The very idea of globalization is what's on the line. Things like the internet, AI, and decentralized finance aren't building the next great empire. Instead, they are acting as catalysts, shattering the old system into a million competing fragments. So what happens when the system designed to connect everything finally disconnects? At first, we can expect confusion and chaos. Prices will swing wildly. Currencies will compete for dominance. Supply chains that we've relied on for decades will reroute or break completely. But after the initial shock comes a period of realignment. We'll likely see the world reorganize into regional trading blocks. Nations will prioritize their own resources, a process some call reshoring or friendshoring. Digital currencies, both state-backed and decentralized, will battle for the trust that fiat money has lost. And then, eventually, comes reinvention. Out of the ruins of the old order, a new one will emerge. It won't be a single global empire. It will be something smaller, faster, more localized, and far more volatile. Each great empire taught the world something new. The Dutch taught us how to trade. The British taught us how to rule on a global scale. America taught us how to consume. This next era, the one we are now entering, will be defined by a different lesson. It will teach us how to survive without any of them. Globalization promised us peace through shared prosperity. But what it delivered was dependency through massive debt. The world isn't falling apart by accident. It is following that ancient, seven-stage pattern. The biggest question for our generation won't be who replaces the last empire, but whether humanity can learn to function without one at all. If this gave you something to think about, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that challenges the way we see the world.